agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Mike.
Before we get started, I'd like to thank our newest sustaining supporters, Michael, Delia, Melissa, Peter, Diana, and Charles. We really do appreciate all of your support. And of course, as a Patreon supporter, you not only get a second full-length episode every week, you also get ad-free versions of all of our shows, as well as various other things at different levels of support. If you'd like all of this bonus content, but you can't afford to financially support the show right now, that's not a problem. Just email me at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll make sure you get access to everything that we're putting out. All right, Jay. So, I thought we had things ready to go, and then there was some pretty monumental and very sad news. Of course, I'm talking about the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. President Trump's statement, I think, put it well, saying she was a titan of the law, renowned for her brilliant mind and powerful dissents. Joe Biden called her an American hero, a giant of legal doctrine, and a relentless voice in the pursuit of that highest American ideal, equal justice under the law. Couldn't agree more.
Same here.
Now, within hours of her death, Senator Mitch McConnell released a statement declaring that President Trump's nominee will receive a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. And also within hours after, former President Barack Obama issued a statement calling on Republican lawmakers to not fill Justice Ginsburg's seat. So that's where we are with 45 days until the election. To think that, you didn't think that things would get any more insane, but wow, here we go. So what do you make of this? Where does this put us, Jay, do you think?
Well, that's a huge question, and I'll tell you, I like to be on this show sort of as candid and brutally honest as I can, and particularly even when it comes to my own limitations. And I'll tell you, I'm going to put out there that I don't really know. And to the extent that there are a lot of people out there saying they do know, I think they don't. You know what I mean? Again, it's just sort of the way this year has gone. There's so much that is weird and different and strange. That said, I would still predict that Republicans are going to make a very strong push to get a replacement nominated and confirmed before the end of the year. To what extent that happens before the election, after the election, is still really, I'd have to say, I think it's beyond my grasp. And if I'm looking at this thing, honestly, I think probably beyond a lot of people's grasp. But it's going to be a wild ride. I think there's a lot of things we could talk about.
I want to point out on that, Jay, already Senator Murkowski said that on Friday, this is before Justice Ginsburg's death was announced, she told Alaska Public Radio that she was against confirming a new justice before the election. And then back in 2018, Lindsey Graham, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee, said in an interview that if there were a Supreme Court vacancy in the last year of Donald Trump's term, he would not act on a nomination before the election. He was, I believe, contacted on Friday, and he wouldn't. There was no comment on that. Also, Senator Ted Cruz, back in 2016, said it has been 80 years since a Supreme Court vacancy was nominated and confirmed in an election year. There was a long tradition that you don't do this in an election year. So there are a number of Republicans who have at least indicated some concern about doing this, and maybe some Republicans in tight races who might strategically think it would be disadvantageous perhaps to do this. And with the 53 to 47 margin, it's not necessarily assured that Senator McConnell actually has the votes to push through a nomination.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would tend to think, that with the potential defections that we've heard so far, one being Collins, two being Murkowski, that I think you could probably say would definitely not vote to replace somebody. Well, again, it's a weird thing when you're saying before or after the election. There's sort of a presumption there, right? That if Trump wins, then they could go ahead and do a replacement. If he doesn't, and they do it in a lame duck session, that's a different story, also. But my sense is when push comes to shove, they would have the votes. Now, the interesting question is, what do you do about some of these close races? You do it before or after the election, because I can argue it both ways. I think you could also have a situation where there are some races where not moving on this would hurt the Republican candidate. So I think it would cut both ways. Some races it would be a let's wait and see how the election turns out, and the other would be no, this is what we elected you for, is to fill judicial vacancies. So I think that's going to be sort of a state by state analysis, right? And again, since this happened last night, I haven't really had the time to think through that, and I don't know that a lot of people have.
Well, another wild card in this, Jay, is, as always, the biggest wild card is President Trump. We're recording this on Saturday morning, and as of yet, the president hasn't announced a nomination that he'll be making one. But there's a case to be made.
I'm waiting by the phone.
Well, yeah. There's a case to be made that President Trump might not want to nominate anyone, and the idea being that if he says he won't nominate anyone until after he is reelected, that would be a spur even more so for conservatives to get out and vote. It could potentially help him. And also, you could argue to a lesser extent, might, with some wavering voters, say, see, he doesn't trample over every democratic norm or tradition. He waited on this. And so I can certainly see a strategic argument in favor of President Trump waiting, because it's not like Donald Trump cares a whole lot about the court's makeup. At least I don't think so.
I think he does.
No, I think you're entirely wrong about that. In fact, there was an interview last year. Donald Trump said, "I had no idea how important Supreme Court judges were to a voter. No idea."
well, now he knows.
Yeah, but I'm saying that if we assume that Donald Trump's first priority is Donald Trump, and I think that's a very safe assumption, and his first calculation is always what will be in my best interest, then I think there's a case to be made that he might think that in his best interest is to hold off on a nomination to rev up the base to get out and vote even more. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case, but we'll certainly find out. I expect we'll hear something, probably in the next day or two, I would imagine, either way.
Yeah, I don't think the math on that works.
Explain.
I think I don't think you are, and everybody's going to come after me. I'm being purely analytical here. I don't think that you're going to move any undecided or Biden voters into your column if you say I'm going to wait. I don't. I think those folks are pretty much filled in there. And
let me stop you there, Jay. Let me stop you there if we get to the second part, because you said you won't move any Biden voters. I agree, but when you say undecided voters are built in there, I would argue that's sort of that doesn't make sense to me, because undecided voters
by definition, if they're undecided, they can be moved.
Yeah.
I guess my issue is, would this be something that would move them? And I don't know that it would. It's when you and I talk about things, and we talk a lot about institutional norms and traditions and that sort of thing, and because those are things that we find important and interesting and valuable. I think your average guy on the street is less invested in that.
Sure.
right?
But this race isn't about that. I mean, the Trump campaign isn't real. The Trump campaign is all about revving up the base. And so my argument here is that if Donald Trump says, if reelected, or when reelected, sorry, that would always be the Trumpian way to put it. When reelected, I will nominate this person, but not until I am reelected. All of a sudden, then a lot of socially conservative voters say, well, I'm damn sure that I'm going to get out the vote and drag people to the polls because this is huge. This is an opportunity for us to change the court in a way. If you take a look at the ages of the justices, that could be a strong conservative majority for perhaps even a generation, and that's a huge impetus that wouldn't exist if there's an appointment beforehand. That's my argument.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. I think that just doesn't work because I think that I think you're misreading the base.
Got it.
I think that would de-energize them. The response would be, geez, at least we thought we could count on Trump. There would be this, look, we put up with all the nonsense and his personality traits and the tweets and all the other goofiness, and sort of the saving grace was this was a guy who wouldn't back down, who wasn't a squish, who wouldn't say, well, all right. And I think if that happened, I think there might be some substantial drop off. Like, look, this is the whole reason I voted for Trump, was he's the guy who would say, the hell with the norms, let's get stuff done. And I think that's, I don't think that energizes the base of just, hey, wait and see, elect me again, and then I'll really get him. And likewise, I don't think it moves anybody who is undecided for the reasons of, look, if you are, say, and I think a lot of people are reasoning, look, this is going to be a battle that is going to be fought sort of in the upper Midwest Rust Belt sort of thing, like 2016 was. If you're the guy in Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, whatever, who is, again, a undecided voter who would be typically are typically less engaged, typically less educated, focusing more on pocketbook issues, are they going to be motivated to, like, look, maybe I didn't turn out last time, maybe I don't like Donald Trump, but damn, he's respecting some institutional norms there, and that's what matters to me. I just
sure. Yeah.
I just don't think that's a motivator there. I think they're looking more at pocketbook things. You and I look at that sort of thing as a big deal.
What do you think about Lindsey Graham? I mean, he was pretty clear in that statement, and not only that, but he's facing a surprisingly close race against an opponent, Jamie Harrison, who's raised a ton of money, and Lindsey Graham's seat is actually in a certain amount of jeopardy, and he's right at the heart of this. Do you think he's going to renege on his promise to not act on a nomination before the election?
Probably.
Okay. And do you think
whether
that,
I mean, again, whether I don't know when I don't think he's going to come out and announce I'm reneging on my promise.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there would be, situations have changed and circumstances are such that, it would be that kind of thing. And so listen, we owe them a hearing and, that kind of thing. So,
right. And so Ted Cruz, when he's asked about, there was a long tradition that you don't do this in an election year, you think he's going to say, well, this is different, and I just said that because I was looking for an excuse to not have a hearing on Merrick Garland?
Well, particularly if he's the nominee, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think with the Senate in doubt that he would never necessarily.
I wouldn't think so either, and I think that would draw much fire. But no, politicians are hypocritical all the time, and
Mitch McConnell though occupies a special honorable place. They should build him a grand pedestal on the altar of political hypocrisy. And so, but anyway, that's we've talked about that before.
But
so.
But my point is that I think you gotta look to it does come down to Machiavelli wasn't wrong on a whole lot of things, right? And
Well,
he was a correct observer, and I really think that.
Well, let's talk about that, Jay. Let's talk about right and wrong. I know that puts you on uncomfortable ground because you'd rather just talk about Machiavelli and power politics and so forth. But let's talk about right and wrong because I think it's important. What would the right thing to do be, in your view?
I think the right thing to do, and this is what I said the right thing to do with Merrick Garland is let's have hearings. Let's have hearings and move forward and see where things are.
And
again, I've been on record numerous times that that's what should have been done with Garland.
And to put that into context, to give people a sense, so we have 45 days until the election, 106 days until the 117th Congress, the next Congress convenes. So it's basically, you got that 106 days from right now. This is Saturday, the September 19th. And to give you a sense, the Gorsuch confirmation from nomination to confirmation took 66 days. It was a little longer, 89 days for Kavanaugh, given all of those issues. But roughly, if the confirmation process took the normal amount of time, this would be enough time. Of course, there are other things intervening because normally Congress doesn't do much of anything.
And normally everybody's out of town for the next.
And so, but in terms of if Mitch McConnell called the Senate back in and they focused on this was their one thing, which I'm assuming it would be, there's nothing to say there would not be enough time to hold normal hearings in very abnormal time, obviously.
Yeah, I would think, and the way I look at this, and again, you're asking me what I think is the right thing to do.
That's right.
As opposed to doing the analysis of how things may actually happen. Because let's have hearings on nominees and let's get a sense of, senators get a sense of what their constituents think.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually
because again, it could go either way. I think you could have a great. You definitely will have a terrific nominee.
Oh yeah, the best ever.
Terrific, fantastic, best nominee ever. Let them campaign on that of, hey, I want to nominate this person. I want this person on the Supreme Court. We're holding hearings. Here's what they've said. And take it from there. That's what I said they should have done with Garland. As well. So.
Well, I'm going to agree with you here, and it's definitely an agreement that's against my interest in terms of how we like the court to be constituted. Obviously, is that and I think I've said this on the show before as well. Is that the president's term is a 4-year term, and the Congress is there for a 2-year. Well, and sorry for the Senate, those terms are those terms. They don't end magically in the lame duck period. Those people were elected for that entire term. And so in that sense, taking any sort of legislative action during the time when they were duly elected, I don't see that as being any sort of anti-democratic thing. And, if that means that, if that leads to a result that is certainly not what I want, which would probably be the case, then, that stinks for me, basically. Yeah. And
I think we're on exactly the same page here, and I would add the piece that, look, this is necessarily a political question, and that's sort of what so when you let's put it in play, right?
I guess I would say that certainly that. The Senate has the right to go ahead with it. It doesn't violate anything. And no, I don't think anyone's really argued that. But in terms of whether it is the right thing to do in a larger sense for the country, that I think that's kind of left up to the individual senators, who I think largely are making that based on political calculations. Right. And so,
but that's good. That's the way it's supposed to work,
right?
Though, right.
Right.
I mean, I would say this is going to sound Machiavellian or callous or that, but to some extent, politics is what you can get away with, right? What people will accept.
Mm-hmm.
With the Garland nomination, there was the big issue of, look, McConnell wasn't going to hold hearings, and the Democrats campaigned against him on that. And their hope was that would be a big deal to the American people, who would view this as, no, it was Barack Obama's nominee to a point. He's got to get a hearing. But everybody showed up and you voted, and in large part that didn't matter to people. Maybe it matters more to people this year. But either way, so often when we talk about institutional norms, there is sort of what are the voters going to accept? And if they say, look, we think the institutional norm ought to be, if you're the president, you get to appoint your guy, and the Senate ought to vote for him, yay or nay. Fine. If they think that there ought to be deference to the election and potential incoming president, then they will make that known to their senators.
And
so
just like
that's good. That's the way it ought to work.
If enough Kentuckians have a problem with Mitch McConnell's colossal hypocrisy and not having a hearing for Garland on made up grounds, but pushing through, whoever.
And I'm sure that is that how you're going to word the polling question.
But I mean, no, but that, I mean,
consider you have a problem with this.
But no, it's not the polling question, right? It goes to your point. If voters,
right,
voters care about that enough.
I was just joking about the formulation of the question.
And another possibility is a number of these senators could say, well, I don't think we should act on anything until after the election, but still, between the election and the new Congress coming in, there are still 61 days, which would be a quick process. And a lot of those senators who are in tight races, who might see a strategic advantage to saying, no, I'm not going to act on anything during this election season, especially if they're defeated, they might say, you know what?
Oh, yeah.
Let's push it forward. So I could certainly see that being, but I think overall, my best guess on this is that there will be a Supreme Court justice confirmed before the 117th Congress sits, is my guess.
That would be my guess also.
Or, you know what? I'm going to go back on that. I'll say...
We can't go back on
that. I think Donald Trump will get another Supreme Court justice confirmed, because if he wins re-election, then I think that the senators will say, you know what, let's not rush this. There's no point, right? Depending on how the elections come out. But if he loses, then it'll be pushed through in the lame duck session. I guess that's what I mean. I think that the balance of the court will shift to 6-3 conservative justices based on this. That's my.
And there's more to it than whether President Trump wins or loses. It also
the Senate composition,
power shift in the Senate.
Absolutely. But I think no matter what, the 53 Republicans in the Senate will have that opportunity to confirm a justice, and maybe it gets down. Maybe they lose a couple of votes, but
they will. Yeah.
But I think that still whoever it is gets confirmed, though I assume that they'll probably pick somebody who will be able to be pushed through fairly easily, and not one of the more kind of firebrand sort of folks that President Trump suggested that were on his list that he released, I think, about a month ago or so.
Well, it was more recent than that, even, I thought. And that's something that, I think maybe gives a little hint here that, they maybe had a sense that this was coming. Again, I mean, Justice Ginsburg was 87 and had been in ill health. So it's not that no one had a sense that this was coming. But they may have had a sense that it was more imminent than the rest of the public did, but by the fact that they sort of released some potential names. And I want to say it was maybe like 2 weeks ago, if not even a week ago.
I thought it was a little longer, but it was fairly recent.
Time is sort of weird and compressed in
true.
These strange days. You know what I mean? It's sort of,
that's true.
remember like 12 years ago when they impeached President Trump?
It's like, and this goes back to something I've been thinking about, this whole process of when will he or she die or retire or something like that. I think to me, it just seems like an insane way to do things. And that kind of goes to one of my many proposals for improving our institutions. And what I would institute is having one automatic appointment every 4 years in the January after the midterm elections. And that means at some points the court will be larger, It could get up to 10, 11, 12. But of course, the size of the court has changed over time. And I would also add to that on a death or retirement, there'd be no new appointment unless it takes the court down to fewer than, say, 9 justices. And there'd be much more regularity in that. And there wouldn't be these just, oh my God moments and it's this sort of strange, come on, RBG, hang on, or, I hope X, it wouldn't be bad if X dies or retires or something like that, which just seems to me to be a crazy way to do things.
Right. No, there's certainly some, there's a big element of chance that just kind of,
and that to me is just that I just think that's just sort of a bananas way to do things. And the nice thing, I don't know, but kind of the idea that I have, it wouldn't require, changing the Constitution or anything like that, because of course Congress sets that, and it could be a very straightforward sort of thing to do. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, there's also sort of again, the randomness that you talk about. I mean, I subscribe to sort of a little bit of a quantum mechanics theory of government, in that, listen, we have this very rational system that is built around constitutions and laws and statutes and procedures, written and unwritten. But when you come down the base, the more you look at it, the closer you look at it, the more it is sort of there's an element of randomness that can't be taken out of the system. And I think this might just be one of them, because I think even your proposal would insert the same randomness to some extent, right? Or it wouldn't eliminate it.
It'd be less random, because we would know exactly when Supreme Court appointments were coming.
Right,
and most of the time,
unless somebody gets hit by a bus,
right? But you think about it, most of the time, the court would probably have 10 or 11 members, and so even if somebody got hit by a bus, there wouldn't be a new appointment.
You lose 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, exactly. It'd have to be a colossal tragedy. So actually, my proposal would take almost all of the randomness out of it, which is why I think that's a good thing. And I should point out, Jay, that in the midst of all this, there's the potential for a government shutdown, because I would say I don't think that's going to happen, but I suppose there's a potential for it. Well, I think that Democrats will be under a lot of pressure to do everything they possibly can to slow down any potential hearings, and that is going to be, one possible tool in the arsenal. But it went from, all of a sudden things went from being pretty wild to just being, oh my God, unpredictable. This just throws a lot of stuff up into the air.
Yeah.
And I am sure we will be talking.
That's why I, at the beginning of this, said, look, I am holding off on my predictions. And again, I am looking at this as kind of the quantum mechanics kind of issue.
I think that's very wise.
Randomness, and we won't know what happens until it happens.
Absolutely. So I am sure we will be talking a lot more about that. But for now, let's move on to our next story. This week, CDC Director Robert Redfield, who's testifying before the Senate, said that while the coronavirus vaccine will be available by the end of the year, it will likely be mid to late 2021 for it to be distributed to the public, to the extent that we can get back to what he called our regular life. And Redfield argued that because a vaccine might be, at best maybe around 70% effective, that masks offer more guaranteed protection against COVID. And he also pointed out that Congress has yet to appropriate the estimated $6 billion needed for distribution of a vaccine. He told the Senate committee that providing that money is as urgent as getting the manufacturing facilities up and running. And shortly after that, President Trump called Redfield's vaccine timeline an incorrect statement, saying distribution is going to be very rapid. He, meaning Redfield, may not know that. Maybe he's not aware of that. And maybe he's not dealing with the military, et cetera, like I do. Distribution is going to be very rapid, and the vaccine is going to be very powerful. The vaccine is going to have tremendous power. It's going to be extremely strong. It's going to be extremely successful. The president also said the vaccine is much more effective than a mask. The mask is not as important as the vaccine. He further went on to say, the mask may help, and I hope it helps. I think it probably does. But again, the mask is a mixed bag. There are some people, professionals, that don't like the mask because of the touchiness. Okay. On the same day, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden raised concerns over political considerations overriding public safety. He said, I trust vaccines, I trust scientists, but I don't trust Donald Trump. And at this point, the American people can't either. Biden also said that widespread distribution of a vaccine will take many months, kind of echoing what Redfield said. So, Jay, what do you take away from this? I mean, is President Trump pushing an unrealistic timeline? Is he overestimating the likely effectiveness of a vaccine? What do you think?
Well, I don't know, because again, I don't know about the military and the logistics that he does. My sense is, first I do want to hit on Redfield's one statement, which I think is sort of weird, of the a mask may be more effective than a vaccine. Well, then, Jesus, what the hell are we messing around with?
Well, let me be clear.
What have we been doing here?
If you read
so why did we shut down the economy then?
No, hold on. Time out. I think that's an unfair statement, because if you read what he said in context, if you read all of his remarks, he clearly said that not that a mask is better than a vaccine, but that given the fact that vaccines are not 100% effective, that until we have mass immunity vaccination to the point where it's not, spreading, essentially, that masks offer more guaranteed protection. And I think a lot of people are maybe taking things out of context and, whether intentionally or not, misstating what Redfield meant.
Well, I just took it from the context that you gave me there. So
sure, I read his whole remarks before. I only read part of his remarks before the Senate committee.
So, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But look, I don't know that what Redfield and Trump are saying is mutually exclusive. My sense is I don't know that Redfield would have the knowledge of whatever logistical stuff we have available to get this distributed. We do know that the U.S. from these trial vaccines we've got so far has already been purchasing, stockpiling, getting ready. And again, I don't have any real insight into how it would be distributed, how long it would take.
What about the effectiveness?
I guess I'm saying I don't know that they're wrong, because it seems like most people are consistently predicting, look, we'll have a vaccine, that will be approved before the end of the year.
And I think that's a fair.
How quickly can we distribute it? That's a second question, and the first is a medical question, and the second is a logistical question.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And, on that $6 billion for vaccine distribution, I should point out that neither party in Congress seems very interested in a single item emergency appropriation for this, and which you would think if there'd be any one single thing that they could get together on, it would be this. But also, I would argue that if President Trump was able to free up somewhere around $8 billion for a wall without congressional approval, I expect he could probably find a way, to get that $6 billion. So, but I think that's an important distinction between the logistics and the scientific part. But on the scientific part, I think, probably I would be inclined to agree more with pretty much all the scientific experts on vaccines saying that, hey, 50 to 70% is what we're shooting for, and not what the president seems to be suggesting, that it's going to be, this extraordinarily super successful, most effective vaccine ever type of thing. And I would imagine you would probably defer more to the scientists over the president.
I mean, look, it's the Trump is, beautiful, powerful wall. It's.
Is that dangerous?
That's typical Trump hyperbole.
Is that dangerous, do you think? I mean, the idea that, and of course that goes with his comments to Bob Woodward, downplaying the virus, his argument being that, well, I don't want people to panic. But is there an issue with raising false hopes, do you think?
I don't know if we were saying raising false hopes. If people would be like, the vaccine isn't as terrific and powerful as I hoped, I don't know. I mean, I saw an interesting stat, then So the Democrats have been pushing on if Trump moves too quick on this, they might have something that's not safe and so forth. First of all, I don't think that's really that much of an issue because it's these pharmaceutical companies that are making it. It's not a Trump branded vaccine, at least not. So I'm less concerned about that. And then Trump has pushed back with the argument of, the Democrats are essentially being kind of anti-vaxxers and trying to arouse fear. But the polling numbers of people who would be willing to take a vaccine when available, there's actually more trust by Democrats than Republicans. I just thought that was interesting. So if the argument is that Republicans are going to buy into this too much and might have overconfidence in a vaccine, it doesn't seem to be, at least the numbers I've seen don't seem to show that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just a general sort of, conservatives tend to be more skeptical of everything. And I think something coming from the government, even if it's the Trump government.
Yeah. And I think just the fact that, there are still a lot more people who are Republicans, Trump supporters who don't necessarily believe that COVID is a thing or a big deal. And I think that sort of view is promoted, even if indirectly, by the president being very sort of wishy-washy on masks and having large-scale gatherings like, for his campaign with no social distancing and no mask. I think that sends a pretty strong message to people saying, you know what, this isn't really anything to worry about.
Well, then isn't it a good thing that he's pushing that everybody got to get the really terrific, super, very beautiful vaccine?
Absolutely. I think it absolutely is a good thing. I only wish that, given the fact that I would agree that it's going to be a while until a vaccine can be distributed widely enough, even using the military and that, and given that it's not going to be 100% effective, I only wish that he were as strongly pushing masking and social distancing until that point. But he's decided.
Fair enough. That's a fair point.
Okay.
One thing I would, in terms of what you mentioned about Republicans not thinking this is a thing, to some extent, I'm wondering if that could also be regional, simply because look, you've got the virus has had a much bigger impact in urban areas than places that are more spread out. Now, that's changed a little bit, I would say, in the last month or two. There's been sort of, at least I know in Ohio, it sort of moved out of urban areas, are now sort of recovering, and the flare-ups have been in more rural areas. But I think there is a line of thought that's not irrational, in that if the vaccine is not 100% safe, or it's not safe enough, people will evaluate their sense of the safety of the vaccine against what they view their risk of getting COVID.
Yeah.
And they're making that choice based on their own situation wherever they are. So if you're out in the middle of Montana and someone says, well, we've got a vaccine that's 70% effective, but it may cause some side effects, would you say, yes, I'll take it? Or would you say, well, I live out in the middle of nowhere and there's really very few cases out here. I would be reluctant. So again, that's very hypothetical. I'm wondering if some of that might play in. So, like, for example, if someone came up and said, hey, we have a vaccine for Ebola, and it's 99% effective, but there could be some side effects, and they offered it to me, I would say, well, no thanks, just because my risk of contracting Ebola sitting here in suburban Cleveland is pretty much nil.
Sure.
Right. So.
No, I see what you're saying, but I think you'd probably agree with me that there's going to be a not insignificant portion of the population that will decide not to get vaccinated.
No, I agree. Yeah.
And that, combined with the fact that we know that even optimistically, the vaccine isn't going to be more than probably 70-something% effective, and the fact that it looks like the leading candidates require two shots, and there's going to be some issues with people getting both in the right amount of time and that sort of thing, means that we're going to be living with this certainly throughout most of next year at the very minimum.
I think that's probably right when you say living with this, but I'm to some extent, I think you also might start seeing, as we've sort of seen already, that the virus is going to run out of steam to some extent on its
Magically, like the
own.
president said, it'll just get better. I don't know about that.
No,
because,
I mean, look, that's things seasonal. They come and go. And
well, that's not true with the virus, though. And in fact, even in Europe now, we're seeing with the relaxing restrictions that there are more. We're starting to see an increase in cases and that. So, I mean, it's not like this just goes away. It's not magic.
Oh no, and I'm not saying it just goes away. But there is. I mean, look, whether you achieve herd immunity through vaccination or through lots and lots of people getting it, there is at some point you start to reach a point of look, in certain populations, in certain places, you have a pretty high concentration of people who have had the virus, like New York.
Yeah, but even there, it's not anywhere close to a
right. No, it's not a 60-70%. Yeah,
nowhere even close.
There is a slowing of, and I think there's just also look. I mean, as best we can tell, right, and no one knows for sure, is once you get it, you have some immunity, at least for some period of time. There's questions as to whether you cracked it and how long that lasts, but that's my point is, yes, I agree that we will still live with it. I don't know that we will be living with it, certainly in the way that we were in March and April of this year.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I think people would still be maybe wearing masks, but I think there will be a lot more things open. People will be going back to school. Life will be more normal. It may not be 100% normal, but it'll be.
At least, we hope. There are obviously some predictions out there that say that by the end of this year, over 400,000 people will have died from this, and that it's going to get considerably worse as we get into the fall. And let's hope that that's not the case. But I think we both agree that the responsible thing for everyone from the President of the United States on down is to, before we have a vaccine, to encourage masking and social distancing. And it's hugely disappointing that for whatever his reasons are, that Donald Trump has chosen not to do that.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, let's move on to something that, isn't hugely disappointing. It actually hasn't gotten a lot of play and will get even less now that, with Justice Ginsburg. But early this week, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords in a ceremony at the White House. The agreement establishes formal diplomatic relations between the three countries, though it doesn't address the issue of the Palestinians, which has been, for a long time now, almost an insurmountable obstacle to better relations between Israel and most of the other countries in the region. At the ceremony, President Trump said, "We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. And after decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East." What do you think, Jay? Does this change the course of history?
Well, I mean, anytime we say this changes the course of history, there's sort of, that remains to be seen. It's sort of a big prediction. Is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely. And I think it's if you look at where the Middle East was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, remember when it was such a huge deal with the Begin-Sadat Accord, Nobel Peace Prize worthy, because that was the first time you had an Arabic or predominantly Muslim country recognize the state of Israel. So now, those numbers are growing. And
2 to 4. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's big.
And even Joe Biden says he supports it. So I think essentially it seems to me that everyone but the Palestinians is pretty happy with this agreement.
Right. Well, and
I wanted to talk about that because I was wondering, we have this agreement and most people would say that given how close Bahrain and how closely they kind of follow what Saudi Arabia wants, that we've seen the Saudis kind of come around a bit too. And there's some suggestions that, maybe this helps to pave the way for the Saudi Arabian government. And that would be enormous. And of course, this is all because of that common enemy that they have in Iran. And so what I'm wondering here is, is this sort of the beginning of the end for the Palestinian cause? And this is not a small question, because there are somewhere around 5 million Palestinians living in the Israeli-occupied state of Palestine. And, to kind of put that into some context, the population of Israel itself is just over 9 million, and only around 75% of that population is Jewish. Most of the rest is Arab. And so, although I should point out that, and when I mentioned this to my wife, she's, as you know, Jay, an international relations professor, she said,
very smart.
Yeah, very smart. Absolutely. She said, Palestine's not actually a state, even though it's.
Told you that. Oh, I could have told you that.
But I mean, it's just, you just call it the state territory. Yeah, exactly. Because even though it's recognized as such by 138 UN member countries, including India, China, and Russia, it's not recognized by, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, and of course the US, and obviously Israel. And so it only has observer status in the UN. And it seems to me that maybe there's more of a move to say, even in the Middle East, that, hey, we gave it a shot, but the threat of Iran is a much more important thing to us than the fate of and I think there are somewhere like around in the whole region, close to 13 million Palestinians. And it seems to me that some of the governments in the region are saying, that's too bad, but we're more concerned with the Iranian threat than we are with getting you statehood.
Yeah, no, I'll say that I think that's probably always been the case, right?
Well, when Iran was less of a threat, you could balance that differently.
But in terms of the rest of the Arab world really supporting the Palestinians, I think they gave them lip service for the better part of 60, 80 years. But when it came to actual aid, the Palestinians, when it came to accepting refugees, they were not so enthusiastic.
Yeah,
they were happy to use it as sort of a cudgel against Israel, but didn't offer real. And then you have the Iranian sort of Syrian connection, and I think a lot of the other part of this is that the Palestinians have been ill-served by their leaders historically. I think that's, there have been numbers of fits and starts where we've had proposals that maybe could have worked, but have fallen apart.
It's hard.
They may have, and the leadership of the Palestinian Authority has been, I'll go ahead and say it, hopelessly corrupt for going 30, 40, 50 years, and linked to terrorists. That's been part of the problem. There could have been a deal, and look, if they, maybe an upshot of this is the Palestinians throw out their leadership and get new leadership that will work more with these other Arab countries and Israel. You get a two-state solution. But again, that remains the same.
I just don't see, no matter what, I think the Palestinians could have the most.
But I think you're right. The other Arab countries are not going to stick their necks out for the Palestinians any more than they have in the past, which is not much.
And you really have to feel for the Palestinians, because they have been ill-served by everyone. There are an awful lot of them, and they're just basically, they're getting, and I'll say it, just screwed over by the world, by their leadership, by essentially everyone, and their status it's really a tragedy. All right. Let's move on, Jay. This is going to take a while, but that's okay. So it'll be an extra long thing. Of course, we weren't expecting the news about Justice Ginsburg, but Attorney General Barr, my God, he has caused quite an uproar this week for a bunch of reasons. One thing, in a recent conference call with federal prosecutors, Barr suggested that rioters should be charged with sedition, which is a fairly uncommon charge, which some critics felt would be overkill, to say the least. And Jay, you probably haven't dealt with a whole lot of sedition charges in your legal career, because
you don't deal with it. It doesn't come up that much.
It basically involves attempts to put down, overthrow, or destroy by force the government of the United States.
It's sort of treason light.
Yes, exactly. And I think the reason why this is being called out isn't that uncommonness of it so much as the sentence. The sentence for tradition, or so the maximum sentence for sedition is 20 years, and that's significantly longer than the maximum sentence for federal charges that are a lot more common that could be potentially laid against protesters, like, for instance,
arson,
civil
riots,
disorder, 5 years, destroying government property, that can be up to 10 years, depending on the value of the property destroyed. But this certainly ups the ante significantly. And so before we get into the other stuff that the Attorney General said, I wanted to get your take on how you feel about his suggesting to U.S. attorneys that, hey, maybe sedition should be on the table.
Well, first of all, I wasn't on the call, so I don't know what exactly the remarks were. But in some cases, I think you could make out a sedition case, right? When the goal is, when they're saying, I want to overthrow the government and I'm here to burn down the courthouse. Yes. But I would also think that those cases are probably few and far between. Actual sedition of I am here espousing, participating in the violent overthrow of the United States government. My sense is, and then also the thing to consider is lots of times when government brings prosecutions, they tend to overcharge with something that is very big, even if they might not be able to make out the elements, and then you back off and get a plea to something lesser. So I mean,
like, we're charging you with sedition, but we'll take
right, if you want to plead down to arson, and
gotcha.
So again, I don't know entirely the context in which he made that, and I think you'd have to look in any case. If any federal charges are brought, they need to have at least the probable cause or a grand jury finding that there are facts to support it. And sedition is probably difficult to prove for that very reason, that there's sort of an element of motive.
Good point.
It's kind of built into it, right?
Yeah. It's
not just why'd you want to burn down the courthouse? Well, because I was mad about George Floyd, or if it was, no, I want to overthrow the government. It's difficult to prove that.
Yeah.
So, I would think a sedition conviction would be hard to get. Maybe in something like the Seattle Chaz area, where they sort of declared themselves, for a couple of weeks their own sort of country. Maybe that sort of helps. But again, I don't think it's a huge deal. I think it's probably more being made out of it than ought to be.
Well, let me ask.
We'll see if there's any actual sedition prosecution.
I'm guessing there won't be.
Doubt that there will be.
Yeah, I'm guessing there won't be. Now the other thing I wanted to mention out of this sort of trifecta of things that the Attorney General said relates to some public comments he made. One thing he said, this was to a Chicago Tribune columnist. He said, I think we were getting into a position where we were going to find ourselves irrevocably committed to the socialist path. I think if Trump loses this election, that will be the case. Now, and during that same interview, the Attorney General agreed that he is not supposed to get into politics. So there you go. Now, to me, this seemed to be just a startling statement for a sitting Attorney General to make, especially one who says he shouldn't be getting into politics. And I got to say, I agree with Jonah Goldberg on this, who wrote, he said that he's done trying to defend him because he seems so determined to go out of his way to invite criticism. And he also suggested that, he's creating a problem here. And if Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch crossed the line, and he thinks they did, of course, so has William Barr. And I wanted to get your take on this.
I think it's an unforced error. I don't get why he needed to say that or go there, or what he would accomplish by saying that.
Because he knows, right? He knows that charge that he hears all the time, that he is being political and carrying water for the president. And so to say something that just blew my mind. And I don't get that.
No,
why he would do that.
Look, I think the Attorney General can still certainly state his opinion on things like the direction the country's headed in. Was it wise to do so? I'd say no. I don't think he accomplished anything by it.
And especially such a wild thing saying, "Oh, if President Trump loses, irrevocably committed to the socialist path." Whoa.
Well,
no, that's not. That
I
is.
I would say
that is
maybe not
ridiculous.
irrevocably, but
well, he did. I mean, he
there
used the word irrevocably. Socialism. My God, man, take a pill.
Well, there is certainly. Let's put it this way: the socialist agenda has been more at the forefront and more pushed and has more support than I think at any time in our history. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that? Maybe, except maybe like the 20s or something like that.
I was going to say the 20s certainly a lot more, yeah. But I would certainly say that there are...
In terms of people who are now office holders and in places of power who... or presidential candidates who've openly identified themselves as socialists and propose things that most people would say are socialist.
Bernie Sanders identified himself as a democratic socialist. It's a different thing, actually, and it's an important distinction that people oftentimes want to pretend doesn't exist. But
and I often say that it's the once you get over the democratic part,
Europe,
forget about that. Then stick with the socialism.
Sure, that's true, but there are plenty of countries in Europe that have stuck with democratic socialism and haven't letting the Democrat go. So I think that you're wrong and always arguing. No, sorry, you're wrong and often arguing for slippery slopes that don't exist. So, and so I think it's one thing to say, hey, I think if Donald Trump loses, we're going to end up going much further to the left, to a path that seems to resemble socialism. And it's another thing to say that we are going to find ourselves irrevocably committed to the socialist path. Those are two very different things.
Would you have been okay with his comments if he said, we will be maybe committed to democratic socialist path?
No, I think that the Attorney General should not say anything about this sort of thing. I think he should literally stay out of, commenting about political candidates and so forth. I think that's a wrong for him to do. Now, speaking of other wrong things, well, I don't know. This is a little more debatable, certainly.
I will definitely debate you on this one.
Okay. The remarks he made at Hillsdale College, a conservative school in Michigan, I believe it is. And the thrust of his remarks was to counter the claim that he's improperly involving himself in political cases that should be left, according to some, largely to career Justice Department prosecutors to handle. Barr said, "The power to execute and enforce the law is an executive function altogether. That means discretion is invested in the executive to determine when to exercise the prosecutorial power." And he went on to say, "It has become fashionable to argue that prosecutorial decisions are legitimate only when they are made by the lowest level line prosecutor handling any given case. The Justice Department is not a Praetorian guard that watches over society, impervious to the ebbs and flows of politics." And he basically argued that the practice of headhunting, that is, going after prominent individuals to make a name for yourself, was a real problem in the Justice Department. And according to some of his allies, they argue that this was intended to apply both to anti-Trump prosecutors as well as to people who pushed for investigations and prosecutions of like Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Yeah. So, Jay, what did you take away from the Attorney General's remarks?
I think he is spot on. This is, our Justice Department ought to be subject to political civilian control.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a concern that has shown up the FBI issue, in the Michael Flynn prosecution, in a lot of these issues where there is a government bureaucracy. I'll go back to this is the Barack Obama administration. It wasn't justice, but Lois Lerner, where you have non-elected bureaucrats who are often there forever, more or less, making decisions. And listen, either we have if you want to have a democratic republic, that means that law enforcement is subject to political accountability. And I think you're better served when you have a system that people are politically accountable. Now, Barr, of course, isn't politically accountable directly, but President Trump is. And if people don't like the way Barr is handling the Justice Department, then take it out on Trump. ballot box. So,
and just to be clear, Jay, on this, based on the plain wording of what the Attorney General said, that the president gets to decide, ultimately through the Attorney General, the president gets to decide who's prosecuted and who's not. And if that means that the president, working with his Attorney General, decide that all of the president's enemies get investigated and prosecuted, and all of the president's friends don't get investigated or prosecuted, that's okay. And the only remedy for that is to boot the president out of office or impeach him.
I'm not saying it's okay, because first of all of it would have to be within the bounds of due process, right? Within the justice system. And you've got the Justice Department, which serves as the prosecutor, and then you also would have the federal judiciary, which serve as an independent branch and a check against that kind of executive power.
Sure. Putting that aside, though, Jay, I mean, the power to investigate and charge certainly is an executive function entirely. Yeah. And that means that, again, taking the Attorney General's remarks just as he said them, which is why I sort of questioned some of his allies' spin on it, that means that, hey, if the president wants somebody prosecuted, then that person should be prosecuted by his Justice Department. And whether the courts find that person guilty or not guilty, that's a separate thing, but that's perfectly okay.
No, it's not okay because, again, there are also civil rights statutes that we have in place that prevent that sort of prosecution for just the harassment of political enemies, prosecutions for political purposes. So there are remedies against that. There are safeguards against that. And I think it would be wrong to do that.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because here's my understanding that it doesn't take much of a pretext for the Justice Department to open an investigation. And oftentimes, if you go on fishing expeditions, you find things, which of course is what, President Trump's allies have been arguing for forever, basically. And so what I'm asking you, what is there to prevent a Trump Barr Justice Department from just really going after the enemies of Donald Trump, or alternately, and maybe this is more of a concern, just deciding to turn a blind eye to potential abuses by allies of the president?
Well, again, the hedge against it is, for one, whoever is being investigated is going to be able to retain counsel. Two, they're going to have hearings in court. They'll be subject to, or they should, under our Constitution, be afforded all the exculpatory evidence that is compiled against them. That was something that was not done in the Michael Flynn case.
But isn't it only after they're investigated and charged? Or am I wrong on that?
No, you're right. I mean, you don't have, if the department decides to investigate someone and they come up with nothing, then they come up with nothing. If they, and you could sort of say, well, maybe there's a no harm, no foul, which again is one of the reasons why typically U.S. Attorney's Office does not publicly say there's an investigation until they are close to being ready to bring charges.
But I mean, just the fact of investigating and charging someone can be pretty damaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about the reverse?
And look, and if you have an investigation that is undertaken for political reasons, you could sue the government. You could sue the people investigating you. Now they would have numerous defenses they could raise as far as qualified immunity and so forth. But there's still a remedy there. You can say, look, these people were out to violate my constitutional rights based on my political belief. So yeah, it's there. And I guess the other thing I would point out is, to what extent have we really seen? Again, Trump's been in office almost 4 years now. The Barr administration prosecuting Trump's enemies. And
I think that's an important point to bring up, which is why I asked you also about. And I hope you can speak to this.
Right, and you would say it's the other way around, as they're letting off his friends.
Yeah, and so a lot of people would point to the Flynn case there, right? I mean, so.
Right. But I would point back with the Flynn case that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. Where you had an investigation,
right,
that was based on really not much at all. There was no actual crime being charged except maybe Logan Act.
But I'm
which
saying
hasn't been-
more generally, it's easier to do. It's easier to get away with not prosecuting and not investigating because it's
Sure.
something, and
Sure.
so that's a greater potential abuse. And so
Sure.
I guess it seems to me, Jay, that there is, if not in law, sort of by practice, there is an unwritten rule, a tradition of the attorney general, of political appointees in general, trying to act with a light hand when it comes to these very political things, and not to just be totally hands off.
I would say they should act with a light hand to all political things all the time, because I think one of the worst things that's been happening is
well, I agree, but it seems like Attorney General Barr doesn't.
Politics into prosecution.
Well, see, I think you and I agree on this, but it seems to me that based on his comments that the Attorney General doesn't so much agree. He's basically saying, hey, this is all my call, and political or not, let's not worry. I mean, and again, this goes to Goldberg's remark. The fact that the Attorney General went out of his way to belittle and inflame, I never thought I'd say this, but I almost found myself longing for the days of Jeff Sessions, who at least understood, had some respect for this sort of, tradition and unwritten law, and not going out and just trying to make himself a focal point for this. And
but if you read the whole thing, where he also talks about the political headhunting,
yeah,
I think that's you got to take that in that context. The issue is, you have line prosecutors who can make a name for themselves by having a big political investigation, sure, whether it's successful or not.
Yeah.
And by doing so, what we're doing is, we're essentially, look, if you want to say that, can you take someone's political motivations out of something altogether? Probably not. But you can put accountability in. So, for example, with the Michael Flynn situation, you had prosecutors who, again, altered FBI agents, altered emails to falsify a warrant to a secret court to spy on somebody. And, that goes to that person's politics and the politics of the department. And there's no remedy for that, right? If these are career line people, there's no remedy for it. You can't, if you remove the president, they're still going to be there.
Well, they can be removed as well.
Attorney General, they're still going to be there.
No, they can be removed.
It's not. I would say it's not easy. And if you look at who's going to do the removing, the person who has to do the removing would necessarily be the president, right, or the attorney general.
No, and I don't disagree with you. There are issues either way, which is why it seems to me that the attorney general is seeing this in a very black and white type of way. And I don't agree with that. It's almost like he has this sort of, Louis XIV view of the executive, this kind of, I am the state. But, I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these other folks, all of these, political appointees, which meaning every U.S. attorney, for instance, takes an oath to defend the Constitution. And that oath supersedes, it's not an oath to the president, it's not an oath to the department. Right. And you just can't ignore that. And it seems to me that Attorney General Barr is going too far in one direction here. Like, if he really cares about being above the fray, he should, for instance, say something like, in comments to the president repeatedly saying the only way we can lose the election is if it's rigged. Well, instead of inflaming things by, talking a lot about, the potential for massive vote fraud, he might want to, comment on that. But he has gone out of his way in just an inexplicable way for me. If I want to grant him good faith, the fundamental belief that he's acting in good faith, he's acting in a very weird way as well. And he keeps on making it harder and harder for me to say, no, here's just the guy who believes in a strong executive and he's acting in good faith, but yet he's doing all these things that make it so difficult for me to keep on giving him that benefit of the doubt.
Let me say, one of my biggest issues, and this has sort of come out throughout, our discussions of the last couple of years, has been, and I think this is a big issue for a lot of Trump supporters, is what they see as an unrestrained, unaccountable federal Leviathan, right? That who is actually in charge, and it gets sort of strange when anytime new administration comes in, an executive branch is that that is their job, is to run the executive branch. And I mean, look, I think you can't disagree. The Department of Justice is part of the executive branch, right?
No, I can't disagree, and I think that's a mistake.
There's
Absolutely,
no two ways
yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And the head of the executive branch is the president.
Yep.
There's no two ways about that either. And that's sort of the point, is if we create this new sort of entity, this permanent bureaucracy that just sort of serves the Constitution as it sees fit, or like Praetorian Guards, and for those who don't follow who the Praetorian Guards were, they were the bodyguards for Roman emperors. And when the emperors got a little out of hand or kind of crazy, which many of them did, Praetorian Guards killed them. So it was, in some ways, well, it's probably good that you got rid of some of these guys like Caligula and Nero and so forth. But that's not our system, and I don't think that's the system we want. Our system is, if you don't like what the president or the emperor is doing, you vote him out based on that, and you have some political accountability. There is no political accountability for the Praetorian Guards. They're always there. You can't vote them out.
Well, and of course, it was not a great analogy, because, of course, you can get rid of career civil servants. And speaking of not great analogies, there was, of course, the other one that I would be remiss, and listeners, I'm sure, would be disappointed if I didn't at least mention the analogy he made between, at least indirectly, between lockdowns and slavery, which was at the very least just something he should have thought better of saying. Yeah. And again, I just, in terms of how he has conducted himself in public life, putting his policy choices aside, I think he has just been incredibly inept in his public statements, and a huge disappointment.
And you know what you can do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do it, certainly, but
well,
I mean,
there you go.
but that doesn't mean that I mean, you're right.
What am I going to do about Peter Strzok?
Well, I mean, you elect somebody who might remove him.
Yeah.
That's accountability.
Right. That's what I'm saying, though. But if the person I elect can't remove him,
right,
what do I do?
But are you?
That's what it comes down to.
But there's no one like that.
The line prosecutors,
except for there's no one in our system. There's no one in our government, Jay, who can't be removed.
Right.
So you're arguing a case that I don't understand. You're saying that there are these people.
I think you're arguing exactly the Barr case, right? This is the whole point is these decisions ought to be made by people who are politically accountable.
Now, see, this is why I'm disappointed in you, Jay, because normally you have a lot more nuance here, and I think you're making the mistake, if I'm reading you correctly, that the Attorney General is that it must be all one way or the other way, when actually I think there are a lot of things that require a certain amount of, not exactly in the letter of law, but discretion and a certain amount of consideration of all the factors. Sure. And I know you believe in this in a lot of areas of life. And so that means that
at the end of the day, somebody's in charge.
Sure, absolutely.
And it's either,
But that doesn't mean.
Let me ask it this way, because maybe we're talking past each other.
That's always possible. Sure.
You're if you have a career prosecutor who brings a charge, and the Attorney General feels that it is not substantiated, or that this career prosecutor is abusing his or her authority, political headhunting, what is the remedy? Under what you're proposing, as I understand, is that, well, the Attorney General shouldn't get mixed up in this.
No.
Right?
You are
getting mixed up in politics.
We are talking past each other.
Them.
Yeah, no, we are talking past each other. I would say that certainly if the Attorney General is clear and strong, compelling evidence that this is the case, he or she absolutely should act. But I'm saying that absent that sort of clear case, the Attorney General should try to kind of take more of a hands-off, except for in those sort of extreme cases. Yeah. And I don't know that you disagree.
I think that's what happened. I mean, I can think of numerous, political prosecutions, some that were terrible. One, Ted Stevens, which was political headhunting, which Chief Justice Emmett Sullivan sanctioned the government for their actions. And I'm also thinking of other political cases where, yes, it was absolutely warranted. And you had, for example, here in Cuyahoga County, we had a big federal investigation. And most of our county government jail, they were all Democrats, but it was prosecuted by an Obama appointee during the Obama administration. They followed through and they got, I believe, a just result. And there were actual crimes committed, and there was plenty of stacks and stacks of evidence. Likewise, right now in Ohio, we've got a situation where our former Speaker of the House been arrested by the FBI and is being prosecuted. And again, there are mountains and mountains of evidence, and this is under the Trump administration by a Trump appointee after a prominent Republican politician who was actually a big Trump supporter, one of Trump's biggest supporters in Ohio. So I mean, I think that works, and in both cases, I can say yeah. And from what I've seen so far, there is a ton of evidence to support these prosecutions. But when you go to something like a Michael Flynn, there isn't that type of evidence there, and the prosecutions were again not even started by line prosecutors. It's internal FBI people. So that's my concern is somebody has to be in charge at the end of the day, and that person ought to have political accountability.
And I don't,
for all the nuance and all that, but yeah, and I think that all factors in, but sure. There's got to be somebody who can say I'm in charge.
I think we don't disagree as much as maybe it came off earlier that we were to a certain extent maybe talking past each other. And I'll just end by saying that I would certainly be more comfortable with you as Attorney General than William Barr, because at the very least, I think you would not sort of be blundering around like a bull in a china shop and I think inflaming an already inflamed political environment.
I probably wouldn't. Yeah, and I appreciate that.
I think so. Well,
I appreciate your support on that.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Well, we are already running very long, but if you want to hear even more from us, we didn't get a chance to talk about everything going on with the Postal Service. There was a big nationwide injunction that was issued this week. And Jay, I know how you feel about nationwide injunctions. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that mailer they sent out. We're also going to give our very first and very detailed election predictions, that and a bunch more. So if you want to catch all that, check out the bonus show, which will be coming out, which we release on Wednesdays. And that, of course, is for our Patreon supporters. If you want to become a supporter and get that and ad-free versions of everything, just check us out at patreon.com/politicsguys. And remember, if you can't afford to become a supporter, just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you full access to everything we put out. Also, if you please could, it costs nothing to subscribe to the show, leave ratings and reviews, and especially sharing episodes on social media. That helps us out a lot. Thank you very much for doing that. If you just generally want to get in touch with a question, comment, that sort of thing, mail@politicsguys.com. Also, check out our Bipartisan Politics subreddit. You'll find the URL in our show notes, and our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politics. The executive producers of Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Morano, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkerson, and Nathan Sosnowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.